So yesterday I made a video on the first bump in the spring in Denton County with COVID. And I ended that video showing that we in fact were seeing the beginning of an increase in exposure risk while the cases and mortality from the first bump were actually peaking. Okay? So remember, the light blue is exposure, okay, which we've been able to calculate using onset date. That's what makes the Denton data so special, is that they do provide both test announcement date and symptom onset date, which allows us to build a timeline much better than just case announcement. So while we're going through this in real time, so on April 4th or whatever, we had the dark blue data. But we didn't have this light blue data, the exposure onset data, until quite a bit later because of the lag in reporting. And so we don't know the exposure as we're going through it. We only can piece it together later once we're out of it. Okay? So now that we're way far away from the spring, we can actually look at what happened. So we had this first bump, right? We talked about that last time. From March to early April. But then from like early mid-April through May, we get what I'm calling the echo ripple, okay? We basically go through the whole process again. Not quite as high, but almost as high as the first bump in March and April. So this is a feature that I haven't really seen many people talk about, and I think what we're doing is we're starting to see how this disease actually functions and why maybe it's a public health nightmare in some ways. So here's the critical concept for this video. There's an inverse relationship, okay, between exposure risk and case announcement. So what does that mean? That means that as new cases increase, as the county announces more new cases, exposure risk decreases. All right? And as new cases decrease, exposure risk increases. So this makes sense. This should make some sense. As the health department says, oh, cases are increasing, we're worried about the situation, people change their behavior. Right? My argument is that most of these waves, well, the waves themselves, okay, so you've got these people who won't wear masks or social distance, who think it's a hoax, whatever. And no matter what's going on, those people aren't going to change their behavior. And so the reason we have these waves is because of this, what I think is probably the majority of people who are playing red light, green light based on whatever the government tells them, government and the media, okay? So when Matt Richardson says, oh, I'm cautiously optimistic based on these numbers, these test numbers, because he doesn't know exposure either, okay? Then people start behaving dumb. They start going into groups, they start going out, and they start spreading COVID. And then when the health department says, uh-oh, we had a problem, oh, well, then they start social distancing. Then they don't go out, okay? So these waves are being caused by people who know how to do this, but just won't do it if they've been given permission or have been told by the government that they should be out in the economy, okay? So you can see it, right? It's like a perfect seesaw, right? When you have low exposure, you have high case announcement, low exposure, high exposure, low case announcement generally, all right? So this is a nightmare for a public health person, because what this means is that when my data tells me things are bad, the actual situation is probably better than when my data tells me that things are good. It's probably more dangerous. All right. And I don't have a solution for how you deal with that, because I've never dealt with this before. This is kind of why the timeline of COVID is a perfect storm. But one thing that you can get from this is that it doesn't go away. Okay? So, what was going on during this echo ripple? Well, at the very beginning, the CDC recommends cloth masks. And this is just one data point of many that makes me believe that many of you think that cloth masks really are a get out of jail free card, and they are not. Okay? Every single public health expert says you need to social distance, you need to stay out of groups. If you have to be in that group, make it a shorter period of time and wear a cloth mask. So no public health experts telling you to put on a mask and then go sit on a patio for a couple of hours or go to a festival. Don't do those things. That's stupid. Like, don't do those things. Wear a mask when you have to be around people, but don't expect that that mask is stopping the epidemic. It's just not. It's going to be many different solutions that we do at once. No one thing is going to fix this, okay? So another thing that probably helped make people feel more confident about going out and being around people and starting to expose more people to COVID was that New York's numbers had started to stabilize around this point. So up until this point, we've been watching New York's situation spiral out of control. And in early April, we started to see a flattening of their curve. And I'm sure that was a relief to some people. And then we go through Easter, and in mid-April, Governor Abbott decides to close schools for the rest of the year, but at the same time announces plans to reopen businesses. So this is the first place where you really see the economy placed more importantly than education. And so, yeah, it should not be a surprise what's happening now in the fall, okay? Governor Abbott made it very clear that that was his priority. But the other thing is, you know, if you're told that a business can reopen, well, that makes it sound like it's not so dangerous, right? So more people are going to go out. That's just how it is. Now, on the 24th, we get a spike in local cases in Denton County. This is most likely due to reporting. So we have real spotty reporting. It comes in at different times, there's a bunch of different labs doing it. The for-profit, the big ones, Walgreens, is particularly notorious for just dumping cases. We're dealing with that now in August. But when these cases spike, that's often enough to make people go, oh, wait, I'll be more careful. Okay, COVID isn't over. Okay, so this was the first little spike after the first big one that made people go, oh, wait, it's not just one spike and then done. So I think that probably helped people change their behavior a little bit here. It explains a little bit why we see exposure coming down in late April, which is interesting because it corresponds to reopening phase 1, okay, this little dip down in exposure. So in reopening phase 1, if you don't remember, you had stores, restaurants, movie theaters, and malls permitted to open at 25% capacity. Most movie theaters did not open. They're only starting to open now. But you had more activity, right? You had the restaurants open. But I also think that this made people more cautious in some ways, right? When you're in shutdown, it's one thing, but you're starting to open. I think that made some people nervous again. Pretty much all of these exposure numbers are going to be because of behavior, because individuals change how they're behaving. So in early May, we start getting really, really politicized pandemic. Okay, so it had been political kind of from the beginning, but if you remember the first part of shutdown, it was very much we're all in it together. Like Dan Patrick's let the grandparents die for the economy thing was considered extremely radical at the time. But by May 8th, you had a bunch of reopening demonstrations, that sort of thing. Shelley Luther, if you don't remember, was the hairstylist in Dallas who insisted on opening her salon even though it was illegal, went to court, refused to admit that what she had done was wrong, and so then was put in jail for a short period of time, which made her something of a celebrity in the pro-reopening camp, okay? So at this point, we have our governor, Greg Abbott, getting angry at the county judge of Dallas for enforcing Greg Abbott's executive order, okay? So this is where things really start to fall apart, and this is where things get really politicized. And having a politicized pandemic is a terrible thing because we are currently so primed to go red or blue, pick a team, that when you make something like a disease, a virus that just infects whoever it can get to, a left or right, blue or red issue, you essentially hobble our ability to control it, okay? Half of the country can't control a pandemic on their own. And so at this point, things start to get more dangerous, okay? So for these first two bumps, right, we're looking at kind of a phase of 20 days between maybe 40 days all in, where you're going up and down. Now, the thing I want to really point out and make you remember is this second little bump here. This is what happens when you have pandemic fatigue, when you have the early stages of political dissent about pandemic operations, and everything is shut down or only phase 1 reopening. So open at a very low level. Okay, so this is what that looks like. This is what the same thing looks like when your economy is open about 50%. Okay, so this is the summer wave, and that is what we're going to talk about next time. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to talk about how did this happen without us knowing that it was happening for so long. Okay.